Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is expected to give details on the restructuring of Eskom when he delivers his budget speech next week. President Cyril Ramaphosa made the announcement and he was responding to the debt on the State of the Nation address in Parliament yesterday. He emphasized that the three separate structures would be 100% state-owned entities and this would not be a path to privatisation. Meanwhile, the request for a special debate on the crisis at the power utility has been granted. It will also discuss the impact of the recent load shedding on the country's economy. So to discuss this further, we're now joined in studio by Ted Blom. He's a mining and energy advisor. Good to have you. Thanks for coming in. So you predicted this, didn't you? That this was the situation we find ourselves in. I mean, I think many people did. But is it a surprise that we're back in the load shedding stable?
Absolutely not. And in fact, I'm forecasting it's going to last intermittently for the next 5 years. And the reason for that is that Eskom hasn't invested in long-term coal supply contracts. So they keep on buying ad hoc piles of coal wherever they can find them. And that primarily causes a problem because the quality is not up to spec.
Yeah.
In addition to that, in 2013, I forecast that there would be a financial meltdown. I'm out by about 2 months. But that was also foreseeable because Eskom's cost structure has just been bloating year after year after year after year, and eventually it gets to breaking point.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking to the staff that are employed at Eskom. I mean, 27,500, the World Bank saying there should be just over 14,000 people employed there, and yet no job losses in the pipeline, which we understand that people are worried about that, but how can you sustain that? Okay,
so the number is actually 48,000 people. Versus 14,000 that the World Bank reckons is enough. I can't see the government restructuring Eskom and solving the problem. I mean, firstly, there's got to be the political will to solve the problem, and I'm not sure that is present because this problem has been around for a long time. But I can't see them making meaningful inroads if they don't sort out the bloated staff count. I mean, by and large, you've got 3 out of 4 people actually not doing work. And the problem is, I saw a previous survey a number of years ago where the people that weren't working were either interfering with those who wanted to work, weren't at work, or were just floating around. They call them floaters.
Yeah.
So you can't have a conducive work environment if 3 out of 4 people are not actively deployed.
Mm-hmm. Which is, it doesn't make any sense. Perhaps you can make some sense for us. How have we landed here? And many people are asking that question. You've got a lot of time to think in the dark and a lot of time to think in traffic when it's taking you 3 hours to get home when it normally would be a half an hour ride. What has happened? Okay,
so you need to turn the clock back quite a long time to 2001. Prior to 2001, Eskom ran for about 80 years as a non-profit entity. It didn't have to draw down 1 penny of government guarantees. It was rated one of the top 5 utilities in the world in terms of lowest cost and availability. And the government in 2001 converted an Eskom to a for-profit company. So that sort of changed management's focus. Instead of cutting the cost as low as possible, they saw their road forward as to hiking tariffs and gorging as much profits out of the South African economy for their own benefit as possible. And the formula that applies is that Eskom gets a percentage increase based on its cost structure. So if your cost structure is bigger, you get a bigger increase. And that set the roller coaster going.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more to it as well. I mean, deeper and deeper you look, you see the corruption, and then you see things happening like which was mentioned this week by our Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan about Medupi and Kusile, saying that, he's basically blaming it on the fact that they are very badly constructed and designed. I mean,
and corrupted as well. So I blew the whistle the first time on corruption at Eskom in 2006. It involved a coal transaction where laboratory assistants were being paid kickbacks to fudge the quality of the coal. So that was 2006, and that's documented. And the perpetrators offered to pay Eskom compensation. Eskom never took it up. So that tells you that the corruption was inherent. It didn't benefit the parties to sort out the corruption. Then in 2007, 2008, I came across what I would call gross corruption on the coal account again, because that primarily was my background. And I picked up corruption of about 8 billion rand a year. That's a lot of money. That was organized crime. It was a syndicate of about 54 people, headed up by a very prominent person. That was swept under the carpet.
Yeah.
When I went to NERSA about a month ago...
Who was the person who headed this up? Can you say?
I'm not at liberty. I'll put myself in trouble and my life in danger again, I suppose.
Yeah.
Last month at NERSA, I picked up that the cost of not running the coal account properly, in other words, having all these short-term agreements and stuff, and not having long-term agreements, is costing you, me and Eskom an extra 40 billion rand a year. So Eskom, if you take the 40 billion from the coal account, and you take the 31 billion that the surplus staff are costing them, that's 70 billion rand. You can amortize any debt with 70 billion rand free cash flow in a year. Eskom hasn't got a financial problem. They've got a management problem.
Yeah.
They're not doing their jobs properly.
Yeah. So we're in this situation now, and it is a bad situation. We've got debt sitting at 419 billion rand.
It's more than that now. Another 20 went on about a week ago.
Okay, so we're sitting at 440 billion rand is what you're saying. You know, where do we start to restructure this? I mean, Eskom are recommending that they write off 100 billion of this debt and they put it onto government's debt. Basically, Moody's are saying, you know, you want to go to junk status? That's the way to do it.
100 billion is not enough.
It's not enough. No. I mean, even if you sell government stake in Telkom, which is about 15 billion, it won't even dent that debt. Where do you begin?
Well, the reason why the 100 billion won't be enough is because Eskom's already projecting further losses of 20 billion rand a year for the next 3 financial year ends. So if you give them 100 billion, 60 billion is already impaired. So you've only got 40 billion to address the debt. So that doesn't make sense. The other problem with the debt, I believe it's grossly inflated. Medupi should have come in at 33 billion. It came in at 69 when the board approved it. It's now running at over 170 billion. So, and that's the debt. So if you say that that's not justified, that the asset shouldn't go from 70 billion to 170 billion, that's 100 billion rands worth of debt for which you got no value.
Yeah.
And the same for Kusile. So
if we do see next week Wednesday our finance minister saying, all right, let's give Eskom a cash injection. They've had many cash injections before and we've seen where that's gone. Will it even help to give them a cash injection when you're saying that the actual problem is the management of Eskom?
Absolutely. So you can throw as much money as you want to. Eskom's got a propensity to burn money at a rate faster than you and I can breathe. So throwing more money at the problem is not going to solve the problem. We'll be back here at the same place in a year's time.
Yeah.
No, I think it needs competent management. It needs a board that's got some energy experience, and that was the big problem with the current board. They were all novices, and they thought it good as their first step to do cutting of the maintenance budget, and that's what left us in the lurch now with lack of maintenance and blackouts.
Yeah.
So it's clear that the board is not competent. It's clear that they have been overrun by the ministry and now by the president, who's now made it his problem. If you had a competent board, you wouldn't even hear about Eskom.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at some of the plans that have been announced from the president, because he's been speaking a lot about it. He has to when we find ourselves in this situation. One of them is the special cabinet committee that's been announced, headed by our Deputy President, David Mabuza. It'll start sitting, I think, next week after the budget. And then they've got to give weekly updates and they have to keep an eye on all of this. Could this help?
No. You need grassroots intervention. Let me give you an example. And I pick this up on a weekly basis. I get a lot of people obviously feeling comfortable to contact me and whistleblow. So I get whistleblowing virtually every day. In fact, it's become a bit of a problem. I can't get the work done in a day anymore. But I mean, there are some high pressure valves, which Eskom uses by the dozen.
Yeah.
The cost to supply, the supplier's cost is 60,000 rand. By the time it gets into Eskom's books, it's over 2 million rand. Now, if that isn't blatant corruption and inflation of costs, then I don't know what is. By and large, as a rule of thumb, everything Eskom does costs them 4 times more than it would cost you and me. So that's not sustainable. So you need a top to bottom clean out because it's at every level and every rung. There are kickbacks, there are people running their own companies or buying from family or taking bribes or whatever it is. At every level, at every project.
Yeah.
I can mention to you Ngula, Kusile, Medupi, the refurbished stations, the old stations, you name it. There's corruption.
What do you do with this information? Do you pass it on? Do you act on it?
I have offered to pass it on, and every time that entails obviously a face-to-face meeting with Eskom. But the bottom line is they don't pay me, and I've got to survive. So I can't go and sit at Eskom's desk for an hour every time I get a whistle blow.
Yeah.
If it's serious and it affects human life, like it with the ash treatment at some of the power stations, which is really, really harmful, I make a call to the CEO or COO, and I say, you've got a problem. Going to the press isn't going to solve the problem as far as human life is concerned. Please attend to it urgently.
Yeah. Okay. Let me throw other things at you. Things that have been mentioned is which the president is adamant on, breaking up the entity into 3 different structures. Do you agree with this? Do you think that this is a way of working it?
Absolutely not. I think it's shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic. Eskom has been run, those 3 divisions that he's talking about, have been run autonomously for more than 30 years. They've got their own divisional executives, they've got their own board representatives, they've got their own budgets, they've got their own chart of accounts. So moving them separately is going to increase the cost. You have 3 boards, 3 CEOs, 3 audit committees, 3 head offices, you name it. That itself, if the president wants to do something, and this I'm trying to be positive, you must either go back to the model that worked for close to 100 years, and that's a non-profit Eskom, cheap electricity run by professional engineers. All they have to do is keep the cost low. That's all.
Privatization?
Well, that's the second option. If he wants to then interfere with the electricity supply industry, he needs to restructure the whole industry and then create competition, create enabling laws for competition, and have a conducive environment that allows competition, because that is one of the reasons why this whole thing has failed, is that under the Mbeki regime, they tried to privatize Eskom, they tried to introduce competition, and then they put a cap on what the competitors were allowed to make in terms of return. And that failed.
Yeah. What about these independent power producers? Because you've got the unions who are adamantly against them.
And for good reason.
Why?
For very good reason.
Good.
Okay. And they're part of the problem at Eskom. Well, firstly, from a supply point of view, renewable energy is not dispatchable. So I don't know whether if I'm running a mine and I'm putting 10,000 people underground, I don't know if I can bring them up at 4 o'clock this afternoon if there's only renewable energy available. Because if there's no wind and no sun, I've got no energy. That's the first problem. So the dispatchability is a major operational issue. And that's causing Eskom to have to burn boilers day and night in case they go offline, so that Eskom could then supplement immediately. You don't want to be without lights if you're a miner.
Certainly not. I mean, you need, how long to bring miners up underground?
You need a couple of hours, but more so you need ventilation and cooling. So that's the first problem. The second problem is the price structure. Everybody was bragging about the Department of Energy doing the best IPP project in the world. If you go back to who made those noises, those were the IPP people themselves. Why? Because we've got probably the most expensive IPP system in the world. The most expensive IPPs are currently generating power at about R4.50 a kilowatt hour. Eskom's marginal cost of making electricity from coal is around about 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So you're talking about 15 times more expensive. Plus, the regulations that they currently stand, Eskom has to buy that power. It's guaranteed sales to those entities, whether it needs the power or whether it doesn't. So that is one of the better observations Mr. Brian Molefe made.
Okay. Just finally, this Italian company, Enel.
I know them.
Do you know them?
They've been around for a long time.
So they're coming in. I know that they say they're one of the biggest energy companies working here on the continent. Can they help? They've been contracted to come in and help.
I would have thought there were people more capable to help. I mean, firstly, I would have gone back to the ex-Eskom staff workforce. These are the people who actually ran these power stations for many, many years, very successfully, and they have a hands-on and cultural experience. You're talking about bringing foreigners into the environment. They don't even speak English, and they're going to get into a configuration that's not Italian. All our boilers are either made by Steinmuller, Alstom, or Hitachi, or Siemens. So they're going to have to familiarize themselves, and that will take some time with the configuration of our power stations. And only then they're going to make a novice's observation, because they're not steeped in the particular technology. So will it work? It might work. The chances, probably less than 50%.
Okay, Ted Blom, mining and energy advisor. Thank you for talking to us here on the program. Not great news coming on the Eskom front, but I suppose the only good news is what we can hear from them is that it looks like it's low chances of load shedding for today. But as Ted said, get used to this for the next 5 years at least. Thanks for talking to us. Right, it is 7 o'clock.